Hey everyone, so we're going to cover Teklovossen Control. So this is the deck that I think is the least solved, I have the least amount of experience with, and I think has the most room to grow, right? So this is here to get the ball rolling, to get ideas out there, to get initial impressions on the hero, what I think deck building could look like. But this is something where I would not be surprised at all if in 6 months we look back at this and we're like, wow, this was entirely off base and the deck looks totally different. But we have to start somewhere, right? I'm just going to take the plunge and try to get something out there so we can start thinking about the hero. What is strong about Teklovossen? Well, the ability to block a bunch with your armor, to replenish it by transforming it in and out of upgrades. And then you also have the Evo upgrade attacks, right? So things like Terminator, Tank, and War Machine. With that being said, the question is, what does the rest of the list look like? We're going to have more defensive tools in this version, right? So this is more of a control style list. We have, of course, his ability to play from the banish zone. So we're going to look for things like scrap rather than boost. So that's a big distinction, right? So scrap is more important in this deck because it allows us to deterministically get it into banish without needing to boost, right? We can then block for 3 with something like the blue Evo Steel Soul upgrades, and then scrap them while still playing something decent on our turn to progress our game plan and still slowly present game threats to our opponent. And then we also have the ability to pitch a blue and then get it back and then draw a card. So part of that also involves thinking about, well, if we do want to draw a card, what are we going to get into our arsenal, right? This isn't an aggressive deck, it's a control deck. We need to have good things we want to arsenal. So we're going to run through it real quick. These sentry bases are pretty good because they're just battle worn. They allow you to get more cards underneath your equipment, which means that if you do want to transform into Teklovossen, you have more cards in soul. I think having these not at full copies is pretty important, right? The 2 blocks are a big downside, but obviously you do need to have them at some point. Fate Foreseen and Sink Below are just 0 cost D-Reacts. Firewall is serving a similar function. I think it's better than those two to some degree, although the ability to react to something in the reaction window is obviously very strong. Scrap Compactor and Scrap Trader are both very interesting. I think that they're pretty close to the same. I haven't figured out the exact math of which one is better. The reason why Scrap Compactor is essentially is a 0 for 3 that says gain 3. Of course, there's a bit of a downside because it doesn't allow you to actually draw the card from it, but the ability to present a threat, scrap something, and then be able to play it is very good. The reason why is because something like Scrap Trader is a little bit harder to get off entirely. So the benefit of something like Scrap Trader, right, is you can scrap maybe, let's say, 2 of these sentries, and then that allows you to use the ability and then pitch something and play it, but it's just a little bit out of the cost curve, and it also means you have to have 2 Evos in graveyard for this to get full maximum value. Whereas this one, to get full maximum value, you only need 1, right? I don't know if it's correct to be running 3 in one of these. I'm currently at a 2 and 2 split. I'm going to play a bunch of games and then I'm going to figure out if I like one over the other. At first glance, see very good merit to both of these. I don't think you want 6 copies because finding the Evos is already hard enough. I don't want to clunk up the deck with more of these effects. I would rather have better defensive tools to be able to live long enough to be able to set up the Evos. Sigil is here as a good defensive tool, but once again, we have to think about, if I'm going to blind draw on my turn for my arsenal, I want things that I actually want in there. There's a lot of very bad Teklovossen blues that attack for 1, like these like blue Scrap Compactor. I'm not going to run that because it's a 0 for 1. So if I draw that off of Teklovossen's ability, that's not a good arsenal target, whereas something like Sigil of Solace is perfectly fine in arsenal. And actually, I do want that in arsenal. So Sigil of Solace is here is a good thing just to be able to do with 4 cards if your opponent passes and does nothing, or if you just blind draw off of Teklovossen and you want to be able to do something with the card. Terminator, Tank, and War Machine are our endgame plays once we have our Evos fully upgraded. Evo Steel Souls are here because they're blue block 3s that are also the end game for our build, right? So these have the strongest effects, the ability to recur, the ability to get extra intellect, the ability to get extra resources, and the ability to get extra action points. When we transform into Teklovossen, these also trigger as well. So even on the Teklovossen turn when you transform, unless I'm missing something or if the barcode is missing important information, you're able to actually attack with Teklovossen multiple times because you have extra action points and a bunch of resources from these triggering when you flip into them. So very good cards. Obviously the best ones in slot. They're just expensive and hard to get out, which is why we have defensive tools to live long enough. In our blue slots, we have cards that we wouldn't hate playing at certain points in the game and that are okay arsenal targets, right? So Hydraulic Press, if you draw off the ability and it's going to go in arsenal, you're not entirely disappointed, right? Because the ability to then, on your turn just pitch a blue, present 4 damage, but then be able to scrap something is good, right? Because you need to scrap at some point. Same goes for Junkyard Dog. Mechanical Strength could be another blue scrap, but I think having a decently statted blue card is going to be pretty good, especially if you're going to be blind arsenaling at some point. Pedal to the Metal, actually has a pretty interesting use case where late game, once your evos are upgraded, specifically these ones, you can on a 4-card hand keep a blues. Teklo Leveler is a 1 for 3 with go again. You can then boost a pedal to the metal, and that consumes your first boost. So that's 2 cards from your hand gone. If they let the pedal to the metal hit, then you use the other 2 cards as another blue to pitch for the Terminator tank or the War Machine. And Overpower is good, but it's not as evasive as Dominate. So the ability to give these Dominates very good. It's super niche. It's probably not going to come up. It's probably going to block or pitch every time you see it, but it's just, you got to think about it, right? Like, I want blues that enable me to have a good 4-card hand when I have tempo, or my opponent passes and does nothing because I'm playing super defensively, or, you know, a decent blue to draw into Arsenal, because we're on 30 blues. So on average, you have a 50% chance to draw a blue off of Teklovossen when you use his second ability. Blue Throttle is just, once again, another blue you wouldn't hate to see if it has to go into your arsenal. Same goes for Unmovable. This is another blue that is just marginally okay to have an arsenal. That's all I want to think about with the blue slots, is how upset am I if I draw these off of Teklovossen and they have to go into my arsenal, or else I just like use the ability to draw a card and just pass and didn't arsenal, right? You know, once again, going to be the hardest thing to figure out, right? What meta considerations do you make when you sideboard? How does that change the sideboarding plan? Is there a better sideboarding plan? Are there cards that are being misevaluated currently? So I'm not really sure, right? But Command and Conquer feels very important, right, against aggro decks. So Runeblades, Rangers, things like that. You need to present disruption. It's a popper into Dromai. What else more do you want? Fabricate. I am not entirely sure when this card comes in, what the use case is. Obviously, the effect is very good, but I don't actually know if I want it in every matchup. So we're going to have to test this card, see how many copies we want, and then see, do we want it only in certain matchups? Do we want it in every matchup? Ideally, you know, into something like Dromai, this is quite good, right? You would have to run extra protos as well. So we're going to have to tweak the sideboard a little bit for that. Still need to get a handle on this card to figure out where it belongs in the list. We just have one extra scrap compactor in here. That could be any other card, but this, you know, could be into more aggressive decks where you need to present something back to them, or slower matchups. Once again, this one is just hanging out. This one's a placeholder. Singularity, you know, that's going to come in for your grindy matchups where you actually do want to flip. Throttle is a popper, and Twin Drive allows you to dig deeper in the deck. So there is the potential for a boost focused plan if you feel like you need it, right? So that would allow you to swap out some of these generics like Vaporcine, Sink Below, and then be able to run these. If you actually wanted, you could even run a few extras. So these Command and Conquers or Fabricates could be, you know, other Mechanologist cards, and then you could fill out the decks so that you don't really have misses in the deck. So it allows you to boost aggressively, allows you to keep tempo while actually digging through your deck for these evos, right? So that's another consideration. It's in the sideboard if you need a more proactive game plan where you can't just stall around forever and wait to upgrade. It's an interesting consideration. The idea of the sideboard is having the ability to have more disruption, to have better utility, to have better end games, but also to be able to apply pressure when needed. So I think that's, you know, the goal of the sideboard is to fill out your matchups. I don't know if these are the right cards to do it, but I needed to present the idea at least, right? So if you're looking at this and you're like, well, you know, Scrap Compactor needs to be this, Twin Drive needs to be this, perfectly fine, right? As long as we get the idea across of what the sideboard is here for. So that's where, you know, thinking about the sideboard, how you want to round out your matchups is important. So tweak it to your own discretion. But yeah, that's the list. So let me know what you think of it. Excited to see where this deck goes. Until next time, thank you for watching.